So we've got our, I've got my black and white landscape, and I achieved that black and white landscape by just adding this black and white adjustment layer to my image. Remember, we always have our background and our background copy, and then we have our adjustment layers. If there are anything that you need to do in terms of doing cleanup on an image, if you want to remove somebody in an image, then that should happen on an empty layer. So we have the background, which should remain our original file, our original image. Then there's the background copy, that's kind of our insurance policy. And to be honest, for best practices in terms of cleaning things up, because there's always something that we're wanting to get rid of or something that we're wanting to touch up, right? So the best policy for that is to actually create an empty layer. I call it an empty layer. I think Christopher calls it like a target layer. It's a layer whenever we hit this little plus here, it gives us a layer, and you see it's got the checkerboard. What does that checkerboard tell us? There's no pixels. There's no information. There's no picture. It's just a blank layer. And this is ideal for doing our cleanup on. Because if we worked on an image and we worked on it, and then we realized that 40 steps back, we messed up. We did something that doesn't look right. And we didn't realize it because we were exhausted and running on one few cylinders. I don't know what, anyways, you get what I'm saying. Then instead of going back in our history and trying to go back or erase the whole thing, we can just go back and erase that one thing that we made a mistake on. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So ideally for cleaning images up, we've got this little Band-Aid here, and if you click on it, all of the other tools will come up. We've got spot healing, remove tool, healing brush, patch tool, content aware, and never in my life have I ever used red eye tool. Just saying. But all of these different tools are going to be helpful for cleaning things up. I'm just going to go with the default of spot healing, and let's say that you needed to remove this flower here. The key command for using the spot healing is just J. You just hit the letter J, and then you can start cleaning things up. You'll see a little pink mask come over top of it, and then it's going to remove that area. Apparently it'll remove it very slowly on my computer. Okay, that's real slow. Anyways, it's going to remove that, and if I went and worked through my image and I've done all of this work to it, so it's gone, and then I realized, oh, you know what, I accidentally, and hopefully this doesn't take too long, I accidentally got rid of part of my waterfall. That's probably pretty critical. Wish I hadn't done that. Too bad that I did that yesterday when I was working on my file, and it was 50 steps ago. I can't go back in my history to get rid of it, and that looks terrible. I need to fix it. Well, instead of having to go back in history or hitting Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, and that'll only take you back so far, instead, because this is on an empty layer, all I have to do is hit E for erase, and now I can just erase that mistake that I made, and I'm fixing that without going back and getting rid of everything. Does that make sense? No?
So the empty layer is like a copy of the picture?
It's not a copy of the picture. It's actually taking information from below that empty layer from the image, and it's putting that on top of the image.
Okay. So it protects it so you're not doing
it on the actual image. And if I needed to go back, I just use the erase tool. I can just use the erase tool on it.
So it saves all the steps.
It doesn't save all the steps. If I were to be able to zoom in on this, you would see each one of the things that I repaired. You could see the getting rid of this or getting rid of that, or getting rid of a stick on a rock. You could see all those things, and if I realized I didn't do a good job there, then I could go back and just use E for erase, and that's the erase tool, and I could get rid of it. So now I can bring back whatever I changed in the image. So if you are in this healing tool and nothing happens, here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to the color image because it's probably easier to see on the color image. So got our background, we got our background copy, here's an empty layer. So say I was using my healing tool and I was getting rid of antennas. And okay, I've got rid of my antennas. I got rid of power lines. I'm just doing some really rough work here. And I got rid of the stuff. I could always go back with the, like I said, with the erase tool and just bring back the things that I want to bring back without having to go back, back in the history or Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z. We could just use the erase tool. Seriously? If the computer works.
Ideally, for every adjustment, you recommend a new layer.
If you're removing anything from an image, if you're trying to fix something in the image, I would do it on this empty layer rather than a background copy. Yeah. So
So when you stack it back all together, how do you not see it on your layer of it if you don't take it off of all of them? Does that make any sense?
it's not doing anything to our background copy. It is just taking information from our background copy and fixing it here. So when I click this off, you see that everything comes back. Does that help?
You can still see it then, so it's really not gone.
It's gone because we have this layer on top of our background copy.
You just don't destroy the original image.
Right, so it's protecting that original image.
If you think about it, like if you have a glass pane and you put it on top of a printed out photo and you draw on the glass pane, you're not obstructing the photo underneath. And then you can erase on top of it through the glass.
But at the end, everything would be, once we export it, it would be back on the original copy.
Not if the item is
Once you get done on the layers.
It is, all the information is still there. This is called working non-destructively. Working non-destructively. If we do everything in layers and we save all of our layers, then we can always go back and we can go backwards and fix it. But if we do it on the background copy, we can't tell where we made those changes. And if you try to erase something from the background copy, it leaves a hole in the image. So by using the healing tool on an empty layer, we're able to fix the parts of the image that we want to fix. And if we made a mistake, we can go back without having to go back in history or Command Z to get back to it.
We can just go back to that layer.
Just go back to this layer. So we're here on this layer, and I'm just going to call this one cleanup. And we label all of our layers because we want to know what every single one of these does. So we've got our black point, we've got our white point, we've got our gray. Now I've got a cleanup layer. And if this is going to happen to all of you, so listen up. If you're going to use this healing tool and you're using the healing tool, you see the pink mask and absolutely nothing happens, it's going to say it's removing it, but nothing happens. I drew a very large area in there and nothing's going to work. And you're like, well, why didn't it work? I saw the pink mask, I drew on my image. Actually, what? That worked. Hold on. Well, I could erase it, but hold on. Okay, I'm just going to try to do a very small area. So I get rid of like the window. All right, so nothing happened. Even though I can see that I've drawn on there, nothing happened. It's because up here in this other tool palette, remember when we had the crop tool, we were able to straighten things, we could change the aspect ratio. So any tool that we're using, we're gonna have additional features to that tool right here at the top. If you don't have sample all layers checked, then that tool isn't going to do anything, because remember the layer that we're on, this empty layer, there's no pixels, there's nothing there. So it won't do anything to the image because there's no pixels in the image. We have to have this checked right here, sample all layers. So if you use one of these tools and nothing effectively works, then it's because you didn't have sample all layers. And so if I do this now and I try to get rid of that window,
Might have to hit the track bar up there on that
remove after each stroke. So now when I do it, it should go, all right, so that went away. So it's sample all layers and then remove after each stroke. So whenever I'm moving this around.
Always check both of those.
Yeah, and that's something that's actually new, the remove after each stroke. But, so if I do this and I get rid of it, then it'll go away. And if I'm like, what did I do? I really messed this building up. The whole point of it was to have red and yellow. Now I don't have yellow. I go E for erase, and then I can just bring all of this back. And this looks awful too, so I'm gonna bring all of that back. So does that make sense why we're using an empty layer rather than painting onto the background copy? Okay. So I'm gonna get rid of all that because I don't need any of it. There we go, got my whole building back. So you'll have that background copy, my cleanup layer, which is on an empty layer, and then we'll have all of our black and white adjustments. Yeah, Carolyn?
And we have to save all of that.
So it will, when you save the PSD,
No, I'm talking about all the layers.
yes,
We have to save all the layers, the black and white.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So when
Okay,
you-
now, once we get ready to actually have the picture with all the saves, how do we do that?
so once we're ready, and I'm gonna do one more thing and then I'm gonna show you how we're gonna save it. When I grade your projects, you're gonna turn in your PSD. So you're gonna turn in your Photoshop document. And if you turn in the Photoshop document, that means you have all of your layers intact. When I open that file, I'm gonna grade you on whether you have turned in your PSD with all of these layers so that I can see them, so that I can turn them on and off, so I can see what you did to the image. So, and they should be named. You should know what each one of them does. And you could put them in folders if you would like. Eventually when we do composites, you're gonna have tons of layers and you're gonna need to put them into folders. But I should be able to open your document and see all of these layers here. So now let's talk about if we need to brighten the image up a little bit for printing. We set the black point, we set the white point, we neutralized our midtones, but let's use our eyedropper here to see about, and I'm gonna go back to this image, to see about brightening it up some before we print so that it doesn't print too dark. What I've done was I've gone in and I've laid down some color sample points. So I use my color sampler tool because this is like leaving a little breadcrumb trail to find out what each part of the image is reading in terms of the grayscale. So I wanted to find out how bright was my brightest area in the image. The brightest area in the image happened to be here in that waterfall. So I laid down a little color sample point. It told me it was at 3%. And then we have, I laid down another one right here, and this is kind of a mid-tone part of our image. We're getting a 61%. And then
How are you getting that little thing to pop on there?
so with the color sampler tool selected, anywhere I put in the image, so what if I'm like, I decide that this is a really, really dark part of my image. I want to find out how dark it is. I can look in the K and it's telling me 94%. If I want to be able to change that, but see how much I've changed it, I can just click, and so now I'm getting this reading here. And if it doesn't give you the K, then just change it to grayscale. So it's telling me 94%. So I've got 3% in my highlight, I've got like 61% in the midtone, and I've got this 92, 94 in this very, very dark area. Here's the thing, when it comes to printing, if you've got something in the 90s, it's not gonna print with detail. There won't be any information there. It's gonna print very, very close to black, really, really dark with no detail. 3% is gonna lay down some ink, that very bright white in the water that's flowing. If it's at 3%, it's gonna lay down some ink. If it's at 0 and we didn't set that white point, then there's not gonna be ink laid down. I'm thinking this has got some interesting stuff in it. I probably want to pull up information in that shadow area. So I'm going to either do a curves or a levels. Like I said, I tend to work with, not that. I tend to work with curves, but I feel like levels is probably simplified, so that's probably gonna work best for anybody who's not familiar with working with curves. So we've got that histogram, 0 to 255, and then here are midtones. So watch what happens to my midtone numbers, the 61, the 92, the 94, whenever I pull this up. You see how those numbers are changing in the K? The first number is what it was, and that second set of numbers is what it is now. So if you're in the upper 80s, you're gonna have a little bit of detail in it. In the upper 80s, it should show some detail. It's not gonna be absolute black. So what it was before was 92%, which would show very, very little detail. I've moved over the middle of my histogram to about 1.21, and now it's reading it at 87%. So that's going to print dark, but it's going to have some detail in it, okay? So that's what you should do before you go to print, is to check these numbers.
For all the blacks and whites.
Particularly for areas of your image that are dark, that you're not wanting to print black. Because like I said, what we see on the screen is backlit, and it appears much, much brighter than what you're gonna get in a print.
So we color grade for the dark areas.
I would say that you want to adjust for your midtones and your shadows, because this did affect my midtones as well. Where I laid down that color sample point in that rock, which was at it's 61%, now it's reading at 54%. So I've just made this small adjustment in my midtones using the levels, that level slider in the midtones. So I've pulled up my midtones and I've pulled up my shadows. It didn't do anything to my highlights. My highlight is still at 3%, but it did adjust my midtones, my shadows. It adjusted my shadows. So that's what I would suggest that you guys do before you go to print. Because if you print it and say, it printed too dark, I'm gonna print again, I'll say, nope. You should have checked it before you went to print. So you'll wanna check that, make sure that you're checking those midtones before you go to print. So just to recap, when we're working on an image and we need to clean something up, we need to get rid of something, use an empty layer. So all you're doing is you're just clicking this little plus symbol, and that's gonna give you a layer with no pixels in it. When you're using any of the correction tools, the remove tools, you'll wanna have sample all layers and remove after each stroke, so that whenever you work on part of the image, that something's actually going to happen on that cleanup layer.
So when you create that empty layer, do you have to click on it to do that?
Yeah, you'll want to make sure that you're on that layer. So we know that we're on a specific layer whenever it's highlighted. So this one is just highlighted over, because if I'm working in the background and I'm using that tool, then I'm doing myself a disadvantage because I can't go back to it. But so that one is highlighted, which means I'm working on the background layer. This one is highlighted, so now I'm working on my cleanup layer. This is working faster now, that's good. All right, so we're gonna label each layer. Now, Caroline, you were wondering about saving all of these. So whenever you're done with the image and you've done all of these different adjustments to it, you're gonna do, you're gonna go File and Save, and that's gonna save all of these layers. And it's even gonna give you a little warning. It's gonna say, hey, well, that's just with file handling. So sometimes it'll say, do you wanna save it with all these layers because it's gonna make your file size bigger? You're like, I don't care. Yes, I don't care if my file size is bigger. I want all of my layers intact. So now we've got this saved, but now we need to what's that?
Turn it into a TIFF.
Well, now we're going to resize it and save it as a TIFF so that we can then put it onto another document to be able to print. So we've got all of our layers, and I'm gonna have to flatten all of my layers. So layer, flatten image.
Compresses all your layers into one.
Right. Make sure that you saved that PSD
First.
with all the layers intact, because if you flatten it first, all those layers are gone. You have to start over.
What? Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there's no way to go back.
There's There's no way to go back. Once you flatten the image, there's no way to go back. That's why I did File, Save, PSD. So now that I've flattened it, it's a good idea to go ahead and save it as a TIFF now, because then it's going to be differentiated from that PSD with all layers intact. So we'll File, Save As, and then down here under Format, it asks you what you want to save it as. I'm going to save it as a TIFF. So now I've got Venezuela 7600 TIFF. TIFF.
Why TIFF?
So a TIFF, whenever we look at our files, we're going to look at our files and say, okay, .nef, .cr2, that's our raw file. That's our original. And then we go to go open it in Photoshop. If we're going into Photoshop, that means we're working in layers. We're going to have adjustment layers. We're going to have the black and white adjustment layer. We're going to have levels. So that's going to be a PSD. That .psd designates that this file has all your layers intact. A TIFF is meant for archiving and for printing. So when we see that designation .tif after that file, we know without even looking that it's flat.
Okay.
It's finished, it's final, and it's ready to print. Okay? So now I'm going to save this as a TIFF. I've already saved one as a TIFF, but I'm going to replace it. That's why I got that dialog box. You're not going to need to change anything here in this specific dialog box. The image compression of none, the pixel order interleaved, the byte order IB. Don't worry about any of this. This default is good. I know that normally whenever a window pops up, I'm like, read everything. This default window is good. You don't have to worry about it. So I said, okay. So look, we just have this flattened. It's just a background copy now with all the changes that I made. I'm going to resize my image. And I need to resize this so that it's going to, so I can fit 2 images onto 1 sheet of paper. So I'm going to stop the recording here and then I'm going to pick it back up.